Alright, in some of the videos I do, it's going to seem like I kind of broach on some topics that seem more conspiracy or foofy or new age or these types of things, and they may seem that way. That, I don't disagree with some of these topics because some of them seem so outlandish that it's kind of hard to believe. I'm 51. A good part of my life has been doing different scientific compilation, data analysis, those types of things. And as well, when I was in school, I had a lot of really old teachers that opened my eyes to things that are no longer taught in schools at all. When it comes to getting your own confidence and your own understanding of things, the main thing I recommend for people is to look at abstracts, know how to read an abstract, know how to read a peer review, or what a peer review is, a peer review publication, Nature magazine, Omni magazine, these types of things that put these peer reviews out. Peer reviews can be manipulated, and there's like maybe 2 or 3 that I can think of that kind of have been scrutinized as far as that goes. But for the most part, they're pretty safe to get a pretty good understanding of the methods and means that were brought to these conclusions for different subjects. And so this is one of the books that I like because this has nothing but abstracts, peer reviews, the scientists themselves talking about what they found. Between Secret Life of Plants, China study, those are 2 of my favorite go-tos for information on here, and these kind of progress to get just more and more amazing. And I guess ultimately for me, there's a quote that I like. It says, comprehend nature and copy it. And that's what I'm trying to do in the greenhouse or the grow room over there is, I have music set for 4:30 and 5 to replicate like the bird music in the morning. I have my lights progress on to kind of mimic like a sunrise, and then taper off at the end, kind of like a sunset. As well as all my things that I like to do with plants. Like I said, some people are dog people, some people are cat people, some are plant people, and I'm a plant person. I love sitting in a garden space even before things were sprouting and just looking at the dirt and the water and the different parts moving and trickling and all that kind of good stuff. The Secret Life of Plants. It's a fascinating account of the physical, emotional, and spiritual relations between plants and man. Peter Tompkins and Christopher Birds, authors of Secrets of the Soil. Once in a while you find a book that stuns you, its scope leaves you breathless. This is such a book. And this is included in this book is a lot of scientific studies that were done in the 20s that were lost and kind of set aside because of the wars. Go through modern research. This first chapter, there's actually a short documentary on YouTube called Plants Can Speak and Water Has Memory. It's like 40 minutes, 35 minutes. And they talk about this first chapter really well. And they interview the guy and talk to him specifically. And it's friggin' amazing because at the end, they hook up digitizers to a cactus and it's able to repeat Japanese. No joke. But I figured I'd read the second chapter. I like one of the people that I found early on was Marcel Vogel with his Vogel crystals. But he was really a scientist that studied fluorescence and luminescence and bioluminescence and these types of things for IBM. And he was, I think, one of the most prolific patent holders for IBM in bioluminescence. I found him on YouTube. He's got a website still that's maintained that talks about his crystals and his research with plants, and with water purification and those types of things. So, but yeah, for the rest of this, I'm just going to read from this on this chapter here. I'll go from this one, then chapter 3 are some of my favorites, and I might just keep posting them and get, just kind of in random order. I don't, some of the stuff I can actually have ideas in my head that I'd like to rattle out too, so. Alright, while Baxter was developing his experiments in the eastern United States, a heavy-set research chemist working in international business machines in Los Gatos, California, was challenged to give a course in creativity for IBM engineers and scientists. It was only after Marcel Vogel had taken on the job that he realized the enormity of it. How does one define creativity, he found himself asking. What is a creative person? To answer these questions, Vogel, who had studied for years to become a Franciscan priest, began writing an outline for 12 two-hour seminars, which he hoped would represent an ultimate challenge to his students. Vogel's own probings into the realm of creativity had started when he was a boy, curious to know what caused the light in fireflies and glowworms. Finding little on luminescence in the libraries, Vogel informed his mother that he would write a book on the subject. 10 years later, Luminescence in Liquids and Solids and Their Practical Application was published by Vogel in collaboration with Chicago University's Dr. Peter Pringsheim. 2 years after that, Vogel incorporated his own company called Vogel Luminescence in San Francisco, which became a leader in the field. Over a period of 15 years, Vogel's firm developed a variety of new products. The red color seen in television screens, fluorescent crayons, tags for insecticides, a black light inspection kit to determine from their urine the secret trackways of rodents in cellars, sewers, and slums, and the psychedelic colors popular in New Age posters. By the 1950s, Vogel became bored with his day-to-day tasks of administering a company and sold it to go to work for IBM. There he was able to devote his full time to research, delving into magnetics, optic electrical devices, and liquid crystal systems, developing and patenting inventions of crucial significance to the storage of information in computers, and winning awards which adorn the walls of his San Jose home. A turning point in the creativity course, which Vogel was asked to give at IBM, came when one of the students gave him an Argosy magazine with an article on Baxter's work entitled "Do Plants Have Emotions?" Vogel's first reaction was to throw the article in the wastebasket, convinced that Baxter was just another charlatan unworthy of serious consideration. Yet something about the idea gnawed at his mind. A few days later, Vogel retrieved the article and completely reversed his opinion. The article read aloud to his seminar students aroused both derision and curiosity. Out of the ruckus came a unanimous decision to experiment with plants. That same evening, one student called Vogel to announce that the latest issue of Popular Electronics referred to Baxter's work, and including a wiring diagram for the instrument called psychanalyzer, which would pick up and amplify reactions from plants and could be built for less than $25. Vogel divided his class into 3 groups and challenged them to repeat some of Baxter's accomplishments. By the end of the seminar, not one of 3 teams had achieved any success. Vogel, on the other hand, was able to report that he had duplicated certain of Baxter's results and proceeded to demonstrate how plants anticipate the act of having their leaves torn, reacting with even greater alarm to the threat of being burnt or uprooted. More so even that if they are actually torn, burnt, or otherwise brutalized. Vogel wondered why he alone seemed to be successful. As a boy, he had been interested in anything which might explain the workings of the human mind. After dipping into books of magic, spiritualism, and hypnotic technique, he had given stage demonstrations as a teenage hypnotist. What particularly fascinated Vogel were Mesmer's theory of a universal fluid whose equilibrium or disturbance explained health or disease, Coué's ideas of autosuggestion as it related to painless birth and self-betterment, and the postulates of various writers on psychic energy, a term popularized by Carl Jung, who, though he differentiated it from physical energy, believed it to be incomprehensible. That'd be like ether theory. Vogel reasoned that if there was a psychic energy, it must, like other forms of energy, be storable. But in what? Staring at the many chemicals on the shelves of his IBM laboratory, Vogel wondered which of them would be used to store this energy. In his dilemma, he asked a spiritually gifted friend, Vivian Wiley, who went through the chemicals laid out for her and said that, in her judgment, none offered any promise of a solution for Vogel's problem. Vogel suggested she ignore his preconceived ideas about chemicals and use anything which might intuitively occur to her. Back in the garden, Vivian Wiley picked 2 leaves from a sacrifice, one of which she placed on her bedside table and the other in the living room. Each day when I get up, she told Vogel, I will look at the leaf on my bed and will that to continue to live. I will pay no attention to the other. We will see what happens. A month later, she asked Vogel to come to her house and bring a camera to photograph the leaves. Vogel could hardly believe what he saw. The leaf, to which his friend had paid no attention, was flaccid, turning brown and beginning to decay. The leaf on which she had focused daily attention to was radiantly vital and green, just as if it had been freshly plucked from the garden. Some power appeared to be defying natural law, keeping the leaf in a healthy state. Curious to see If he could get the same results as his friend, Vogel picked 3 leaves from an elm outside his IBM laboratory at home and laid them on front of a plate of glass near his bed. Each day before breakfast, Vogel stared concentratingly at the 2 outer leaves of the glass for about 1 minute, exhorting them lovingly and to continue to live. The center leaf he assiduously ignored. In a week, the center leaf had turned brown and shriveled. The outer leaves were still green and healthy looking. Most interestingly to Vogel, the severed stems of the live leaves appeared to have healed the wounds caused by being ripped from the tree. Vivian Wiley continued her experiments and later showed Vogel the saxifrage leaf, which she had kept green and alive for 2 long months, while the control leaf was completely dehydrated and brown. Vogel was convinced that he was witnessing the power of psychic energy in action. If the power of the mind could keep the leaf green way past its time, Vogel wondered what its effect might be on liquid crystals, an intensive study of which he was pursuing for IBM. Trained in microscopy, Vogel had taken hundreds of color slides of liquid crystal behavior magnified up to 300 times. When screened, they rivaled the works of a gifted abstract artist. While making the slides, Vogel realized that by relaxing his mind, he could sense activity not visually revealed by the microscopic field. He began to pick up things at the microscope which eluded others, not with ocular vision, but with his mind's eye. After becoming aware of them, Vogel says, I was led by some form of higher sensory awareness to adjust the lighting conditions and allow these phenomena to be optically recorded to the human eye or to a camera. The conclusion at which Vogel arrived is that crystals are brought into a solid or physical state of existence by preforms, or ghost images of pure energy which anticipate the solids. Since plants could pick up intentions from a human, that of burning them, for example, there was no doubt in Vogel's mind that intent produced some kind of energy field. By the fall of 1971, findings that his microscopic work was taking up most of his time, Vogel abandoned his research on plants. But when an article on this research quoting Dr. Gina Kermanera, psychologist and author of a popular book on the seer Edgar Cayce, appeared in the San Jose Mercury and was wired by the Associated Press throughout the world, Vogel was besieged on the telephone for information and was thus stimulated to continue. Vogel realized that before he could observe with precision the effects on plants of human thoughts and emotion, he would have to improve his technique of affixing electrodes to the plant's leaves in such a way as to eliminate random electromagnetic frequencies, such as the hum of nearby vacuum cleaners, major sources of spurious data, or engineer's noise, which could cause the pen recorder to drift on the chart, and which obliged Baxter to conduct most of his experiments between midnight and dawn. Vogel also found that some of the philodendrons he worked with responded faster, others more slowly, some very distinctly, others less distinctly, and that not only plants but their individual leaves had their own unique personality and individuality. Leaves with large electrical resistance were especially difficult to work with. Fleshy leaves with high water content were the best. Plants appeared to go through phases of activity and inactivity, full of response in certain times of the day, days of the month, sluggish or morose at other times. To make sure none of these recording effects was the result of faulty electroding, Vogel developed a mucilaginous substance composed of a solution of agar, which a thickener of carragum and salt. The paste he brushed on the leaves before gently applying carefully polished 1 by 1.5 inch stainless steel electrodes. When the agar jelly hardened around the edges of the electronic pickups, it sealed their faces into a moist interior, virtually eliminating all variability in the signal output caused by pressure on leaves when clamped between ordinary electrodes. This system produced for Vogel a baseline on the chart that was perfectly straight without oscillations. Having eliminated random influences, Vogel began a new round of experiments in the spring of 1971 to see if he could establish the exact moment when a philodendron entered into recordable communication. Recordable communication with the human being. With the philodendron attached to a galvanometer which produced a straight baseline, Vogel stood before the plant completely relaxed, breathing deeply and almost touching it with outspread fingers. At the same time, he began to shower the plant with the same kind of affectionate emotion he would flow to a friend. Each time he did this, a series of ascending oscillations was described on the chart by the pen holder. At the same time, Vogel could tangibly feel on the palms of his hands an outpouring from the plant of some sort of energy. After 3 to 5 minutes, further release of emotion on Vogel's part evoked no further action from the plant, which seemed to have discharged all of its energy in response to his ministrations. To Vogel, the inner reaction between himself and the philodendron appeared to be on the same order as that evoked when lovers or close friends meet. The intensity of mutual response evoked a surge of energy until it's finally expended and must be recharged. Like lovers, both Vogel and the plant appeared to remain suffused with joy and contentment. In a botanical nursery, Vogel found that he could easily pick out a particularly sensitive plant by running his hands over a group until he felt a slight cooling sensation, followed by what he describes as a series of electrical pulses, indicating a powerful field. Increasing the distance between himself and the plant, Vogel found, like Baxter, that he could get a similar reaction from it, first from outside the house and then from down the block, and even from his laboratory at Los Gatos, 8 miles away. In another experiment, Vogel wired 2 plants to the same recording machine and snipped a leaf from the first plant. The second plant responded to the hurt being inflicted on its neighbor, but only when Vogel was paying attention to it. If Vogel cut a leaf off while ignoring the second plant, the response was lacking. It was as if Vogel and the plant were lovers on a park bench, oblivious of passers-by until the attention of one lover became distracted from another. From his own experience, Vogel knew that masters of the art of yoga and teachers of other forms of deep meditation, such as Zen, are unaware of disturbing influences around them when in meditative states. An electrocephalograph picks from them quite a different set of brain waves than when the same persons are alert to the everyday world around them. It became clear to Vogel that a certain focused state of consciousness on his part seemed to become the integral and balancing part of the circuitry required to monitor his plants. A plant could be awakened from somnolence and to sensitivity by his giving up his normally conscious state and focusing a seemingly extra conscious part of his mind on the exact notion that the plant be happy and feel loved, that it be blessed with healthy growth, and in this way man and plant seem to interact, and as a unit, pick up sensations from events or third parties which become recordable through the plant. The process of sensitizing both himself and the plant, Vogel found, could only take a few minutes or up to a half an hour. Asked to describe the process in detail, Vogel said that first he quiets the sensory responses of his body organs, then he becomes aware of an electric relationship between the plant and himself. When a state of balance between the bioelectrical potential of both the plant and himself is achieved, the plant is no longer sensitive to noise, temperature, and the normal electrical fields surrounding it or other plants. It responds only to Vogel, who has effectively turned himself to it or perhaps simply hypnotizes it. Vogel now felt confident enough to accept an invitation to make public demonstration with the plant. On a local TV program in San Francisco, the plant, coupled to a pen recorder, gave a live illustration of varying states of Vogel's mind, running from irritation at an interviewer's questions to quiet tracings established when Vogel was at harmonious intercommunication with the plant. For the producer of ABC's television program, You Asked For It, Vogel also demonstrated that the plant's response to his or another person's thoughts, including a sudden release of strong emotion on command, followed by the act of his quieting the plant to normal reactions to its environment. Invited to lecture to audiences who had heard of his experimentation, Vogel said unequivocally It is in fact, it is fact. Man can and does communicate with plant life. Plants are living objects, sensitive and rooted in space. They may be blind, deaf, and dumb in the human sense, but there is no doubt in my mind that they are extremely sensitive instruments for measuring man's emotions. And now they're saying that every single plant cell has visual and auditory cell structure within it, or structure within it. They radiate energy forces that are beneficial to man. One can feel these forces. They feed into one's own force field, which in turn feeds back energy to the plant. The American Indians, says Vogel, were keenly aware of these faculties. When in need, they would go into the woods with their arms extended. They would place their backs to a pine tree in order to replenish themselves with its power. When Vogel began to demonstrate plant sensitivity to states of attention, different from the supposed awareness which most humans like to call consciousness, he discovered that the reactions of skeptics or hostile observers could produce strange effects on him. By paying attention to negative attitudes emanating from the audience, Vogel found he could isolate the individuals emitting them and counter their effect with a deep breath learned in yoga instruction. He would then switch his mind to another mental image, just as if he were turning a dial to a different setting. The feeling of hostility or negativity in the audience, says Vogel, is one of the main barriers to effective communication. To counteract this force is one of the most difficult tasks in public demonstration of these plant experiments. If one cannot do this, the plant and therefore the equipment will go dead, and there is no response until a positive tie can be reestablished. It seems, he says, that I act as a filtering system which limits the response of a plant to the outside environment. I can take it off or on so that the people and the plant become mutually responsive. By charging the plant with some energy within me, I can cause the plant to build up a sensitivity for this kind of work. It is extremely important that one understand that the plant's response is, in my opinion, not that of an intelligence in plant form, but that the plant becomes an extension of oneself. One can then interact with the bioelectric field of the plant or through it, with the thought processes and emotions in a third person. Vogel concluded that a life force or cosmic energy surrounding all living things is shareable among plants, animals, and humans. Through such sharing, a person and plant become one. The oneness is what makes possible a mutual sensitivity, allowing plant and man not only to intercommunicate, but to record these communications via the plant on a recording chart. Because his observations indicated that there was an interchange, even a commingling or fusion of energies when the plant and man commune, Vogel wondered whether an exceptionally sensitive individual could get into a plant, as was reported of the 16th century German mystic Jacob Bohm, who as a young man became illumined and described being able to see in another dimension. Bohm said that he could look at a growing plant and suddenly, by willing to do so, mingle with the plant, be part of the plant, feel its life struggling towards the light. He said he was able to share the simple ambitions of the plant and rejoice with a joyously growing leaf. One day Vogel was visited in San Jose by Debbie Sapp, a quiet, self-effacing girl who impressed Vogel with her initial ability to enter into instant rapport with his philodendron, as established by his instrumentation. When the plant was entirely calm, he asked her point blank, "Can you get into that plant?" Debbie nodded assent, and her face took on an attitude of quiet repose, of detachment, as if they were far away in another universe. Immediately the recording pen began to trace a pattern of undulations, revealing to Vogel that the plant was receiving an unusual amount of energy. Debbie later described what was happening in writing. Mr. Vogel asked me to relax and project myself into philodendron. Several things took place as I began to carry out his request. First, I wondered exactly how I could get inside a plant. I made a conscious decision to let my imagination take over and found myself entering the main stem through a doorway in its base. Once inside, I saw moving cells and water traveling upward through the stem, and let myself move with this upward flow. Approaching the spreading leaves in my imagination, I could feel myself being drawn from an imaginary world into a realm over which I had no control. There was no mental pictures, but rather a feeling that I was becoming a part of and filling out a broad, expansive surface. This seemed to me to be describable only as pure consciousness. I felt acceptance and positive protection by the plant. There was no sense of time, just a feeling of unity in existence and in space. I smiled spontaneously and let myself be one with the plant. Then Mr. Vogel asked me to relax. When he said this, I realized I was very tired but peaceful. All of my energy had been with the plant. Vogel, who was observing the recording on the chart, noticed an abrupt stop when the girl came out of the plant. On later occasions, when the girl re-entered the plant, she was able to describe the inner makeup of its cells and their structure in detail. She specifically noted that one of the leaves had been badly burned by an electrode. When Vogel detached the electrode, he found a hole almost all the way through the leaf. Vogel has since tried the same experiment with dozens of other people, having them go into a single leaf and look at individual cells within it. All gave consistent descriptions of various parts of the cellular body, down to the detailed organization of the DNA molecules. From the experiment, Vogel came to the conclusion we can move into individual cells in our own bodies and, depending on our state of mind, affect them in various ways. One day, this may explain the cause of disease. The ability to go into a plant and analyze what part of it is hurt was demonstrated on TV film on Good Friday, 1973, when Vogel, Dr. Tim Montalbano, who had been working with him for over a year, were filmed during the plant experimentation by a TV production team from CBS. It was highly embarrassing to both researchers that the plant seemed not to respond. Vogel asked Montalbano to see if there was something wrong with the electroding. Instead of tampering with the electrodes, Montalbano, to the astonishment of the CBS technicians, sat where he was and after a moment of concentration announced that the damaged cells in the upper right-hand corner of the electroded part of the leaf were shorting the electrical circuit. In the presence of the TV men, the electrodes were removed and the leaf was found to be damaged exactly where Montalbano had said. Because Vogel knows that among all humans, children are the most open-minded, he has begun to teach children how to interact with plants. First, he asks them to feel a leaf, describe its temperature, consistency, and texture in detail. Next, he lets them bend the leaves and become aware of their resilience before going on to pet the leaves gently by stroking their upper and undersides. If his pupils take pleasure in describing to him the sensations they feel, Vogel asks them to take their hands away from the leaves and try to feel the force of energy emanating from them. Many of the children instantly described a rippling or tingling sensation. Vogel noticed that those children who felt the strongest sensations were wholly engrossed in what they were doing. Once they felt the tingling, he would say, "Now completely relax and feel and give and take of the energy." Feel the give and take of the energy. When you feel it pulsing, gently move your hand up and down over the leaf. Following his directions, the young experimenters could easily see that when they brought their hands down, the leaf fell away. By continued repetition of this motion, the leaves would begin to oscillate. With the use of both hands, the experimenters could actually get a plant to sway. As they gained confidence, Vogel urged them to move further and further away from the plant. This is basic training, says Vogel, to develop an expanded awareness of a force which is not visible. The awareness established, they can see and they can operate with this force. With the awareness established, they see they can operate with this force. Adults, according to Vogel, are much less successful than children, which leads him to surmise that many scientists are not going to be able to repeat his or Baxter's experiments in laboratories. If they approach the experimentation in a mechanistic way, says Vogel, and don't enter into mutual communication with their plants and treat them as friends, they will fail. It is essential to have an open mind that eliminates all preconceptions before beginning experiments. Indeed, Vogel was told by one doctor working in California Psychical Society that he had not a single result, though he had worked for months. The same is true for one of Denver's most renowned psychoanalysts. Hundreds of laboratory workers around the world, says Vogel, are going to be just as frustrated and disappointed as these men until they appreciate that the empathy between the plant and human is the key. and learn how to establish it. No amount of checking in laboratories is going to prove a thing until experiments are done by properly trained observers. Spiritual development is indispensable, but this runs counter to the philosophy of many scientists, who do not realize that creative experimentation means that the experimenters must become part of their experiments, and they already are. This highlights the difference in approach between Vogel and Baxter, indicating perhaps that Vogel is establishing a type of hypnotic control over his plants, whereas Baxter says that his plants, left strictly alone, will quite normally react to their environment. Vogel says that even when a person can affect a plant, the result is not always a happy one. He asked one of his friends, a clinical psychologist who had come to see for himself if there was any truth to the plant research, to project a strong emotion to a philodendron 15 feet away. The plant surged into instantaneous and intense reaction and then suddenly went dead. Vogel asked the psychologist what had gone through his mind, and the man answered that he had mentally compared Vogel's plant with his own philodendron at home and thought how inferior Vogel's was to his. The feelings of Vogel's plants were evidently so badly hurt that it refused to respond for the rest of the day. In fact, it sulked for almost 2 weeks. Vogel could not doubt that plants have definite aversion to certain humans, or more exactly, to what those humans are thinking. This being true, Vogel considered it possible one day to read a person's thoughts through a plant. Something of the sort had already taken place. Vogel had asked a nuclear physicist to mentally work on a technical problem. As the man was cognating, Vogel's plant registered a series of tracings on the recorder for 118 seconds. When the tracing fell back to the baseline, Vogel informed his scientist friend that he had stopped his train of thought. The friend corroborated. Vogel wondered if he had actually captured a process on a chart via the plant. After a few minutes, he asked the physicist to think of his wife. When the physicist did so, the plant again recorded a tracing, this time for 105 seconds. It seemed to Vogel that right before him in his living room, a plant was picking up and passing on a man's mental impressions of his wife. If one could interpret such tracings, could one not know what the man was thinking? After a break for a cup of coffee, Vogel almost casually asked his friend to think once more of his wife in the same way he had thought of her before. The plant registered another 105-second long tracing, very similar to the first. To Vogel, this was the first time a plant seemed to have recorded a similar thought spectrogram and duplicated it. By pursuing such experiments, says Vogel, we may have means of technically identifying energies coming from the human mind, translating them and feeding them back into an as yet undeveloped device. A whole evening of thinking may be explicit. Entertaining a group of skeptical psychologists, medical doctors, and computer programmers at his house, Vogel let them look over his equipment for hidden devices and gimmicks which they insisted must exist, then asked them to sit in a quiet circle and talk so as to see what reactions the plant might pick up. For an hour, the group conversed on several topics with hardly a response from the plant. Just as they had all concluded that the whole thing was fake, one of them said, "How about sex?" Their mutual surprise, the plant came to life, the pen recorder oscillating wildly to the chart. This led to speculation that talking of sex could stir up the atmosphere some sort of sexual energy, such as the organ discovered and described by Wilhelm Reich, and that the ancient fertility rites in which humans had sexual intercourse in freshly seeded fields might indeed have stimulated plants to grow. The plant also responded to spooky stories told in a darkened room lit only by a red shaded candle. At certain points in a story, such as the door of the mysterious cabin in the forest began to slowly open, or suddenly there appeared around the corner a strange man with a knife in his hand, or Charles bent down and raised the lid of the coffin, the plant seemed to pay closer attention. To Vogel, this was evidence that the plant can measure figments of the imagination being converted to energy by the group as a whole. Dr. Hal Puthoff, a physicist at the Stanford Research Institute in Palo Alto, invited Vogel and 5 other scientists to witness the effects he was getting by hooking up a chicken egg to an electropsychometer or e-meter, developed by L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. The e-meter's function is almost identical to that of a psychoanalyzer, which Vogel had first used with his seminar students. Puthoff attempted to demonstrate that the egg wired to the e-meter would respond when another egg was broken. He broke 3 separate eggs, but nothing happened. After asking Puthoff if he could try, Vogel put his hand over an egg and related to it exactly what he had learned to relate to his plants. In 1 minute, the needle of the e-meter galvanometer dial began to move and finally pinned. Vogel backed 10 feet away and got gyrations from the needle by opening and closing his hands. Though Puthoff had several others present tried to do the same, all failed. The needle's movements, once thought to be affected by the resistance on the skin of humans attached to electrode, is known as galvanic skin response, or GSR. Some plants have no skin in the human sense. The term for the effect on plants has been changed to psychogalvanic response, or PGR. The PGR, says Vogel, exists not only in plants but in all living forms. The directive action of the mind focuses this energy on command, releases the force in a series of pulses which can pass through glass, metal, and other materials. No one yet knows exactly what they are. In Russia, a psychic called Nina Kulagina can turn the needle of a compass without touching it, but she has to do it with her hands near the compass. For more impressive feats have been demonstrated at Stanford University, especially by the remarkably sensitive Ingo Swann, who attributes his success to techniques he learned in Scientology. With nothing but his willpower, Swann has been able to affect a mechanism in the university's most thoroughly shielded quark chamber, buried deep underground in a vault of liquid helium, impenetrable to any known wavelength of the electromagnetic spectrum, astonishing the academic physicists who watched him perform what they considered to be an impossible feat. Vogel stresses that the experiments with plants can be extremely dangerous to those who do not have the ability to properly alter their states of consciousness. Focused thought, says Vogel, can exert a tremendous effect on the body of a person in a higher mental state if he lets his emotions interfere. No one, says Vogel, who is not in sound bodily health should become involved with plants of any other kind of psychic research, Though he has not been able to prove it, Vogel feels that a special diet of vegetables, fruits, and nuts rich in minerals and proteins allow the body to build a kind of energy necessary for such work. One draws energy at high levels, he said, and this requires good nutrition. Asked how the higher energies, such as thought, might operate on the physical bodies of living organisms, Vogel says he has now begun to speculate on the strange properties of water. A crystallographer, he is interested in the fact that, unlike most salts, which have one crystalline form, core samples of glacier ice have more than 30 different forms. Uninitiated persons, when first looking at them, says Vogel, could conclude that they were observing as many different substances, and they would be right in their own way, because water is a real mystery. Vogel makes the prediction, which he stresses is as yet far from established fact, that since living things all have higher water content, the vitality of a person must be in some way related to the rate of respiration. As water moves around the body and through its pores, charges are built. Vogel's first clue about his postulate on water came from the fact that some psychics have lost several pounds of body weight during sessions in which they expended vital or psychic energy. If we could weigh a person doing psychic research on a sensitive scale, says Jess Vogel, we could find that there is a loss of weight in each case. It is a water loss. As it is in persons who go on crash diets. Whatever the future brings, Vogel believes that his research with plants can help man to the recognition of long-ignored truths. By developing simple training kits, which he is presently designing, he thinks he can teach children to release their emotions and watch the effects in a measurable way. They can thus learn the art of loving, says Vogel, and know truly that when they think a thought, they release a tremendous power or force in space. By knowing that they are their thoughts, They will know how to use thinking to achieve spiritual, emotional, and intellectual growth. This is no machine to measure brainwaves or any gimmick to help people to become seers or mystic, Vogel insists, but one to help children become simple, honest human beings. Asked to sum the importance of his research with plants, Vogel replied, "So much of the ills and suffering in life comes from our inability to release stresses and the forces within us. When a person rejects us, we rebel inside and hold on to this rejection. This builds a stress which, as Dr. Wilhelm Reich showed so long ago, becomes locked in muscular tension. If not unblocked, depletes the body's energy field and alters its chemistry. My research with plants indicates one pathway to deliverance. For Marcel Vogel, plants have opened new horizons. The vegetal kingdom seems capable of picking up messages of intent, benign or malicious, that are inherently more truthful than when translated into words, a talent which all humans may share, but which they have momentarily occluded." Two young Californian students of humanistic psychology and Hindu philosophy, Randall Fontes and Robert Swanson, have now pursued Vogel's quarry into unbeaten ground. Using sophisticated equipment lent them by the IBM researcher, they have made a series of discoveries so surprising that despite their youth, they have been granted funds and equipment by established universities to further probe the mysteries of plant communication. Fontes and Swanson's first discovery came virtually by accident when one noticed that the other's yawnings was being picked up by the plant in the form of energy surges. Instead of ignoring the phenomenon as improbable, the two students followed up the cue, remembering that in ancient Hindu texts, an exaggerated yawn was considered a means by which a tired person could be recharged with vivifying Shakti, postulated energy filling the universe. With the help of Norman Goldstein, a professor of biology at the State of University in Hayward, California, Fontes went on to discover an electrical potential traveling from cell to cell in the ivy philodendron, which gives a strong indication of the presence of a hitherto unsuspected simple nervous system. As a result, Fontes has been invited to direct a project into the Science Unlimited Research Foundation at San Antonio, Texas, and the effects of human consciousness on living organisms. Meanwhile, Swanson is cooperating in the setting up of a parapsychologically oriented counseling center at the John F. Kennedy University in Martinez, California, where one of Swanson's goals is to determine just which people affect plants telepathically and which do not. And so in that, one of the things that I was taught in the meantime in regard to that was that plants, what you see is literally identical to our nervous system without the body, like turned inside out. So when we're seeing that, that's like our nervous system, and it behaves in the same way. It has the same chemicals, melatonin, serotonins, these things. But those are in further chapters, as well as peripheral teachings and other books and stuff as well. But yeah, so that's it for now. I'm going to read chapter 3 here coming up next.